That was a good effect by a little bit of light. Good evening, dear guests. Good evening, dear colleagues, and a warm welcome to tonight's lecture. This evening goes beyond. It is more than a lecture. This evening is an invitation for us to reflect as individuals, as communities, and as institutions on how we can shape transformation by design, not by disaster. We'll hear more about that in a minute. So this evening unfolds in three ways. We start with a lecture, followed by an interactive panel discussion, and then I hope you will all stay for a more informal exchange or an apéro with our speakers. Before we start, I'm honored to welcome dear Korab Zuka, my colleague. He's the Chief Sustainability Officer at Novartis. He will kick us off with a very personal address and then introducing our distinguished speaker, Professor Peter Messerli. Korab, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nelly. Good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here. This evening, I want to spend a few minutes talking about really reflecting on the power of community using a personal story. And community can be such a force for transformation, particularly in the area of social impact and sustainability. My own life experience, actually, having been a refugee twice, I should not say so far, because I think that's probably more than enough. It has taught me really the power of community. The first time was when I was fleeing the war in Kosovo with my family. And we ended up actually going to Canada as refugees. And that's when we relied on local organizations who were able to actually support us in settling in Canada and making Canada our new home. After the war, we all returned to Kosovo. And of course, after a country goes through a war, it is not the same when you leave it and as you find it. When I returned in Kosovo, I also set up one of the first gay and lesbian organizations. And the goal was really just to make sure that the LGBTQ+ community had really a safe place to stay in their own home country. But that wasn't really easy. And it's not easy in a conservative country, particularly a country that has gone through a war, where the LGBTQ rights were just not a priority. Yet my work really gave me the determination, but also the courage to push for a fairer and also more equal world. This work actually then led me to being a refugee the second time. And the second time I ended up getting asylum in the US. This is about 20 years ago. And I continue to rely again on grassroots organizations that were really able to help me navigate what started my new life again in the US. I actually recently moved to Switzerland about 3 months, and I'm really pleased to share that this was on a voluntary basis. Having gone through these experiences, there are really 3 lessons that I learned that I wanted to share with you. The first one is that pushing for change, it is not easy. And it really requires persistence, it requires perseverance, and it requires patience, because it doesn't happen very fast. And of course, when you're a young person, you're not very patient, so you want to see the change immediately, but that's really not the case. The second lesson, and this was really an important lesson for me personally, because it instilled the belief in me that everyone has the right to a safe and a healthy life. And then the third piece was really, the third lesson was really around, which I believe is also the most important lesson, is that community can be the catalyst that delivers sustained change. And when people are part of the solution, that change usually endures. And we at Novartis, we believe in co-creating solutions with communities, really a partner to partner, a partner of equals that's trying to solve something together. And this belief is also echoed in the work of the Wyss Academy and Professor Messerli. Just as I learned that LGBTQ rights in Kosovo cannot be imported or imposed from the outside, they had to be built within the country itself. His research shows that sustainable development works the same way. It must be rooted in the places, but also the people that it serves. The Wyss Foundation which is founded by Hansjörg Wyss, supports innovative, lasting solutions that really empower communities. They protect nature, but also strengthen human connection to the land. The foundation's partnerships with indigenous and local communities, and these are really the people that are in the front lines. These are the people that are going to see most of the effect of the shifts in climate change. But that shows that conservation is really the most powerful when it's driven by the community. Professor Messerli, director of the Wyss Academy for Nature, has spent decades working across continents to really understand how communities interact with land, policy, and the global systems, which you really need all of these to be able to make a difference. His work, from co-chairing the UN's Global Sustainable Development Report to leading Wyss Academy's work on equitable transformation, shows us that lasting transformation happens when science listens to communities, and when we treat communities not as beneficiaries, but really as co-creators. His approach reminds us that community is really not a side note, it is a starting point, and frequently it is where transformation begins. So we are very privileged to hear from both of them tonight on how we can build on these transformations together. So please join me in welcoming Professor Peter Messerli to the stage.
Dear Korab, thanks a lot for this very kind and also very thoughtful introduction, and I think your impressive journey perfectly reflects what the topic of tonight is. It's about change happening either way in this world, but of us struggling to perhaps navigate and catalyze that change as individuals, but also as communities, and more importantly, guided by the values that we want to defend. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a huge privilege to speak here tonight, especially also after my predecessors 2 years ago, Thomas Zurbuchen, who helped us to look into the stars, and Kathleen Carico last year, who invited us to look inside the code of life itself. So after these journeys into the vast and into the microscopic, I would like to invite us just to the living middle. This living middle, you know, where everything we know and everything we love is happening. And it's also the fabric of our shared future, landscapes, communities, ecosystems interacting together. So my proposal for tonight is quite simple. Let's explore how we can care for this vulnerable planet, and let's rethink how nature and people can strive together on this planet. I would like to start a little bit with the big picture. And I was just 1 year old when this picture was taken by the Apollo 8 mission, a picture of Earthrise, which becomes the emblematic image of the vulnerability and beauty of this planet. And now, 57 years later, and you know, you might say this is a considerable age, but for planet Earth, history of 4.5 million years, it's just a blink of an eye. In this time, dramatic change happened. Population on Earth has grown by factors 3, and the global economy has grown by factors 30. And a wise man once said, "Who thinks that on a limited planet exponential growth is possible is either crazy or an economist." And he was an economist himself. But indeed, also in my first part of my professional life, we really try to understand what are the implications of that, of humankind being the driving force of planetary change, or what we call the Anthropocene. And of course, the environmental impacts became a key topic, and seeing how it leads to the environmental crisis of biodiversity and climate change. And just 2 weeks ago, researchers have released this recent report called the Global Tipping Point Report, ahead of the next COP in Belém that is coming up. And you know, as you would be pushing a ball up a crest of a hill, the temperature which is rising may trigger feedback loops and have unpredictable dynamics. And they pointed to the danger of these tipping points when we pass 1.5 degrees. So we see the coral reefs that die back, we see the melting of the Antarctic ice shield or the mountain glaciers, or we can even imagine that the Amazon will die back because it can take not more than 25% of deforestation. So really catastrophic scenarios. And it shows us first that despite the fading political and public interest in these topics, the urgency is growing and growing. And secondly, we also see that the climate and the biodiversity crisis are deeply entangled and they have to be solved together. But this is not the only evidence we see in the Anthropocene. And if I use the word of Fridays for Future, when we say climate justice, we have a lot of scientific evidence behind that. Indeed, it is a very unequal world. And let's just imagine or look at these figures. Think about the indigenous people and local communities. They only make up 6% of the world population, but they're managing over 50% of the remaining ecosystems. They're producing almost no emissions. More than 50% of them live in poverty, but they only receive 1% of climate and biodiversity funding. And on the other hand, the 10% richest, we know, emit more than 50% of all emissions and more than $1.8 trillion in harmful subsidies solidify that system and power. So justice, that means the questions who protects, who benefits, and who decides, is not just a moral compass or a luxury, it's actually a condition that change can happen, that it will stick. And following one more label of Fridays of Future, system change, not climate change, we see a lot of scientific evidence proving that this is right, that we cannot just fight the symptoms, but we have to look at the underlying driving factors and the dysfunctionalities of the systems we live in. Let's just look at the food system. You see here in blue, the food system is creating a value of $10 trillion every year. But it's not only creating value, it's also creating harm. Harm to the health of people. Half of the population is malnourished or wrong nourished in the world. We have environmental costs, we have economic costs. It adds up to $12 trillion of cost. And that means we even have a negative balance. But taken together, these things, now here we stand with climate justice, system change, we have the evidence. The connection that we need to make is between those two, and I would propose, let's call that just transformations. And that's exactly where the 2030 Agenda stands for, trying to describe what we mean with that. And you know, it's not a laundry list of 17 New Year's resolutions, but they are very closely connected, trying to describe how people and planet are connected. And so sustainable development today is not just the 3 pillars that we should remember, but it's the question how we can create a space for humanity where it is safe against planetary boundaries and overshoots, but at the same it is just for people to achieve minimal thresholds of human development. So it's about negotiating, navigating, and dealing with that. I will say you more about what role science can play to navigate that space. But at the moment, I would just like to pause and ask you, where do you stand? Do you really think this transformation will be possible, that we can make it in time? And do you really think we'll make it just if we make it, so that everybody is part of it? Probably a lot of us are hesitant. We're anxious. And I translated this anxiety into this picture. It's a little bit the ride on the Titanic. We know there are big icebergs ahead. The authoritarianism, the wars and the geopolitical upheavals, and the environmental crisis behind it. And it's scary, and we're tired to hear that. So why not just enjoy the ride in the first class up there and have fun? And yes, I think there is a little bit of Trump, in all of us. One of these captains of the ship, who calls down the outlook and say, no, we don't want to know. No more facts about icebergs. Let's have the party. And perhaps we close the door to the second class because there's not enough space for everybody at the party. But these icebergs will not go away, and there is uncertainty. There is, perhaps water currents with AI and demographic shifts, so the trajectory is not really linear. But change is happening, transformation is coming, and the question is, do we do it by design, or just do we wait for the disaster? So I would like to come to this second part, and it starts also in my life in 2015, when the world embraced those sustainability goals enthusiastically because we could agree on same values. That's quite exceptional, 190 countries. But member states also quickly realized that it is a unique compass for our values, but it's not actually a plan how to implement it. So member states also asked, what's the role of science? What can they contribute to it? And they defined this mandate of the Global Sustainable Development Report, which we had to hand in 4 years later at the General Assembly. But I still remember the conversation with the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, when he appointed me to be the co-chair of this group. And it really changed also my professional life. And he said, Peter, we have listened to you. You're telling us what the problems are. You're having a lot of doomsday scenarios. We have heard the message, and we have a Paris Agreement. We have a 2030 agenda. And he came close and said, but please, turn those sentences around of if-then. If we want to maintain the 1.5 degrees or the agenda, what is the knowledge that helps us solve those problems? So this shift from warning to guiding played, at least for me, an important role, saying, how can we go away from just describing problems to thinking what are solutions to navigate these course of societies in the future? And I would like to share with you a few insights of this report. And the first is about systemic approaches. So if you take a global agenda of protecting forests, for example, to the Peruvian Amazon, you will meet local communities who need access to the forest, who are living with the forest for centuries. You will also meet the global food systems, who currently only gives a value to trees once they are cut. And even better, they can be replaced by soy production, for example, that is exported to faraway countries. So it means if we want to achieve conservation, succeed, we also need to think how people make a living, how governments make policies, and how the market values nature. We have to address those underlying things. And so we have to think about the systems behind it, which is, of course, the global economy. It's the energy system, it's food systems, and the urban and peri-urban development, but also how we protect the global commons and what is actually human well-being to us. These were the first insights. And the second question was, if we want to move along this river of transformation, what are the levers that help us make those changes? And yes, there are many levers to do these changes. The first one is, of course, science and technology, and many of us hope that science will save us and technological things will do it. But it's quite interesting, if we look at the map of where science is actually happening or what is invested, you see those pie charts, and in red, this is the private sector research and development. So this science is huge. It's mostly in the global north, but of course may have a different purpose than just going for transformations. If you look at the blue one, that's the public funding into science. And you all know we're fighting between basic research and applied research, between problem and solution oriented. So in general, I would say countries are not giving themselves the money or the science to solve those existential challenges that we are facing. So I think, yes, science and technology is part of the solution. It's needed for transformation, but science itself also needs to transform if we want to be fit for purpose. Societal change, individual and collective action. Yes, how can we do that? And we have seen, of course, signs of hope. One girl in 1 year mobilized 14 million people in 150 countries. Amazing. But in general, we also observe we still follow this motivational curve that you see on the right-hand side, which we observe when we are confronted with existential challenges. We mobilize energy first to deny. And then perhaps energy levels are falling, we're frustrated, we're going into the depression. That's perhaps where we currently are. We are seeing the old systems don't really work anymore, and we're not seeing the new ones yet. But we will have to move up the other side, slowly motivating and finding agency again. Then, of course, the next important level is economy and finance. Private sector is a key role in this transformation. And we can ask, are we investing into sustainable and circular economy? I just take the shortcut and present these facts to say no, not really yet. The economic cost of environmental change currently amounts to $38 trillion per year. That's a very recent assessment, that will be in 2050. And also an interesting assessment by the International Faculty of Actuaries, so that's not Swiss piece, that's actuaries, who calculated that by 2070 we will probably face a GDP loss of 50%. In other words, we're actually cutting off the branch on which we are sitting. And we have to ask, should we not move those CSR things that are normal in the companies to become an integral part of a business strategy? Because protecting the resources on which businesses finally depend on could be quite a competitive asset in the future. And the fourth lever that we have is, of course, governance, regulation. And we can ask, do we have the right rules and regulations that can guide transformation? And I put up this image here of the Swiss dairy and meat sector. And it's quite interesting to know that 20% only of this marketing campaign is paid by our taxes. So it's subsidized. And the whole sector gets about 65 million every year. If we understand the problems of the food system, we can ask, is this really a smart investment? And I think it's not about how much regulation we should have. It's about what is a smart and effective regulation. That's what we should talk about. Good. These are some insights about the levers, and I just summarize it. So if we want to focus on these entry points and have changes, we have a huge potential of levers if they pursue the right purpose. And the second if is, I think we should not wait for silver bullet solutions in one of the levers. The true need for innovation is probably in making smart combinations. How can economy work together with society, as you mentioned, Korab? How can science be closer together with governance? So these combinations will probably make the biggest difference. And they should depend and adapt to the needs of different countries. And that's my last point here. If we look at countries, where do they stand in terms of transgressing the biophysical boundaries and achieving social thresholds? The overall pattern is, of course, grow first and clean up later. That's where we stand. But more importantly, I think we should note that it should be in our interest, in everybody's interest, that every country deviates from that path as of now and moves towards this sector where we bring people and the environment back into an alignment. And it's important to note that every pathway is different. It's a different starting point, and the vector going up there is a different one. So we have very little to teach to our partners and friends in Madagascar or in Kenya. We can do is to work with them and find solutions that fit for them. But very importantly, they have in common, they all need to create a co-benefit between human well-being and protecting nature, which is the very vision also of the Wyss Academy. I will say more about that in the next part, but just from my personal experience of this time at the GSDR, and I like this citation by the old philosopher Seneca, who said, it's not because it's difficult that we don't dare to do and solve those problems. My impression was, it's because we don't dare to solve those problems that it becomes difficult. There's a huge potential. And with that in mind, I would like to tell you about another encounter which I had in 2019 with a very inspiring person. Hansjörg Wyss, your courage and your vision really made a difference in the world. And in your recently published biography, you remind us that impact is really an art. It's the art of believing that if you bring together science and people and partnership and action, then you can really make a change in the world. And on that belief, I think we created the Wyss Academy, the Wyss Foundation created together with the Canton of Bern and with the University of Bern, the Wyss Academy for Nature. By translating those global challenges into local realities, our mission is to overcome this growing gap between knowing and doing, or bringing insight to impact. This is our mission. And I would like to tell you a little bit about what we are doing. We have chosen 6 landscapes across the world, 2 here in Switzerland, in the Grosses Moos and in the Alps. We have a landscape in the Peruvian Amazon, which I just showed. We have 2 landscapes in Kenya. We have 1 in Madagascar and 1 in the border of Laos and Thailand. And you may ask, so how do you do that? How do you translate insight into action? Sounds good, but how to do it? We worked a lot on it, and we tried to reflect our learnings. And we established those landscapes at what we call a real-world laboratory. And the approach that we chose is, let's go to action. Let's experiment with these incubators. Let's experiment by using those 4 levers I showed to make systemic change on the ground. That's perhaps the central activity that we do. But we need science. We need science to inform those designs. We need science to monitor what we do, and we need science to learn from it. Also, these changes shall not happen without having what we call a coalition for change. We need stakeholders who agree that they want a change and who can make shifts in power and decision-making. And thirdly, who are we to say, to what shall we transform? We need the people agreeing on what the future should be and identifying that together. This will make the change stick. And finally, we need to monitor and learn from what we do. Not only because we have to prove that we can have impact, but also acknowledging in such a complex world we have to move forward in a learning way, adapting what we do. So this is our approach, and I would like to invite you to 2 small journeys into the African context, and the first I would like to bring you to Kenya. In Kenya, we work in semi-arid lands where we have a lot of pastoralists, the Maasai people, who follow with their cattle the rains traditionally to feed them. They have coexisted with wildlife for many, many centuries. But times are changing, and those spaces have been fragmented. We see buildings, we see roads, we see farms, we see private conservancies, and that creates conflicts between people and wildlife, but also between those herders and conservation areas. And our research teams in parallel have also analyzed the global models about climate change and downscaled it to local scale. And they found out that there is actually not less rain. There's the same amount of rain, but it is occasionally in time and very intensive rain sometimes and in certain places. So on that basis of insight, we very much welcomed an initiative by young pastoralists who said, let's conserve our land, let's restore it, to keep that rain when it comes. By building what we call semicircular bunds, so that the rain is stopped, it can infiltrate and make vegetation grow. We supported them together, and we quickly achieved 5,000 bunds working with an NGO and with women's groups, etc. But of course, we needed again science to say, are we on the right path? So a science team here installed a monitoring system where we could quickly observe how does the rain go into the soil. And we compared on the left-hand side a degraded system, and on the right-hand side, the restored system. And we could see that in degraded soils, the rain, when it falls, it cannot go into the soil, so it will flow away on the surface, leaving the soil drier and drier. And that, of course, will hold vegetation. And with less vegetation, we have less humidity, which in turn will have less rains. So it's a vicious circle. And on the right-hand side, we saw that the soil is really becoming humid, and the groundwater is accumulating, the vegetation is growing, and more vegetation, that was fascinating, also leads finally to more humidity, and again more rain. So it's that what we call a virtuous cycle, going the right way. And we could say from the scientific perspective, yes, change is happening. And we pushed this ball of the degraded system over the tipping points to the other side and came into a newer balance. That was the scientific answer. And we were very satisfied. But having scientists on the team and reflecting what we are doing, we also asked, if we have more vegetation, what will people do? They'll have more cattle. And more cattle, will graze again. And will we ultimately push the ball back to the old system? So that's when we realized we have to expand from the restoration work into additional levers of change. Here on the left-hand side, the lever of governance, we have to agree how is the grazing happening in these landscapes? Where can people go? Where do we have to protect? And on the right-hand side, the lever of economy, this restoration needs to make sense economically. And you see here that people have planted now aloe vera into those semicircular bunds to have a direct income. And secondly, you see this weird fence against elephants, which is built out of beehives. So these bees have a double job. On the one hand, fight the elephants when they're touched upon, and secondly, to become an income in terms of honey for the local people. So adding these levers, we really could grow momentum. And the scaling was possible from 5,000 to 32,000 to 100,000 bunds now, working with partners across the landscapes, and also having benefits for biodiversity in these fields. That's one example how science helps us to think about creating impact. And with this, I would like to invite you to the second and last little journey that we have. We're going over the Indian Ocean to Madagascar. And here we find ourselves at the Masuala Peninsula, a beautiful landscape where the biodiverse forests are meeting the Indian Ocean. But protecting of nature also meets people. This is the main place where we work, in this valley that longs the park and where we have our real lab. You see, it's very remote, and you see our team here on motorcycles driving up the valley to do their work and to reach those remote villages. Here, the park on the right-hand side was installed, and the farmers, they have lost access to their land. So they have to struggle in a reduced space to survive. And we can say some of the poorest people of the world are actually paying the price for a global biodiversity benefit. And that's where we want to intervene. And the first thing that we did is, together with the valley people and the stakeholders, we decide, so what's the vision? They said, we want to live a good life, but in peace with the environment. That was a big achievement. Everybody agreed and signed that and said, let's defend that. Together with these people, we then identified what are the critical factors to make this vision come true. It's about incomes. It's about stopping deforestation. It's about the educational spirit and of innovation and better links to financial assets. Many factors came up. And together with scientists, we then thought, how are these factors connected? How do they influence each other? And that resulted in this spaghetti diagram, which somehow depicted the understanding of what the world looks like of these farmers. And further analyzing it, we could identify what are the levers, where can we change the system, and where are the symptoms. So you can see, for example, stopping deforestation. If you succeed, there are no arrows leaving there. You will not change the rest of the system. But if you work on number 5, on accessibility, a lot of things will happen. And here we looked, for example, what are positive feedback loops? And here, this yellow one, we tried to work on that by creating what we call a nature-positive business. We have worked on silk production. And silk, of course, needs forests for the silkworm. And people have planted 2,500 trees as a nursery source. We have then worked with local women and trained them. And we have created over 80 jobs already now working on this silk. And together with partners, we're working also on the value chain. Where can we sell this silk? And it's interesting that we have received requests from the US and even from Gübelin, a Swiss jeweler, who will pack their jewels into this silk. So this is ongoing, but I'm convinced that here we could show, here we change a bit the system which keeps nature standing because it has a benefit for people. And I would like to show you a second example that addresses this issue of accessibility. We said we cannot build roads, it's not our job, but could we have a digital accessibility that will solve some of the problems? And we installed 4 centers in these villages, and we equipped them with electricity and access to internet and AI access, and we had local young people who are ready to be digital coaches. And one farmer came and asked, look, I have a rice paddy, but I cannot with my hoe plow the whole field. I don't have the money to borrow an ox from my neighbor. What can I do? And he searched ChatGPT. He found Indian farmers who had the same problem. And he found a plan to build a plow that can be pulled by hand. And you see him here with his plow that he developed himself through his ChatGPT journey. And now he's actually plowing the entire rice field. And we're expecting his harvest to have doubled this year, actually, when harvest time comes. So, with this farmer being empowered to innovate himself and change things, I would like to come to my conclusions. And, we have started by looking on the planet from far away, and we saw changes happening. The future is not written, but we have to decide if we do it by design or if we let, disaster happen. So that means being on Titanic, just hoping for the best, or even worse, becoming cynical, cannot be an option. Think transformation happens when we take it into our hands, when we regain our agency, and when we make a difference. And we all have a role to play as individuals, as professionals, as companies, as institutions, to get this started. And let's imagine and let's build a world in where nature and people can strive together. This is the work of the Wyss Academy, and I think it can be the work of us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter, for this thought-provoking journey. It was a journey, truly. And to continue the conversation, I would like, in addition to you, to welcome back Korab on our stage, but also to warmly welcome, and it's a dear honor to have you here tonight, Hansjörg Wyss, the most impactful conservationist of our times. Big applause. I am buying the audience some time so you can prep for your questions, because those who are frequent guests know that the microphone will be going around in the audience, but I will kick us off with a couple of questions. Hansjörg Wyss, I have it in my hands, the authorized biography that was only published this year.
Yes.
Without giving away too much, because we want everybody to read it, but who was this written for? What's the audience in mind? What is the impact that you wish this book will have?
That's a tough question, because which I didn't think about at all. But I think it gives an idea of my values and what I have always wanted to do in my life. So, it tells a little biography, really. And the fact that I'm sitting here tonight is really very, I think, it's a privilege, and it's an encouragement for me, and it's encouragement, I hope, for Peter and his whole staff to keep working on the things he has just explained.
We have a young audience in the very front rows. What is your message for the next generation sitting here?
Message for the next generation? That's an impossible question, because the next generation is facing so many problems on theirs, and also so many opportunities, that it's an impossible. I can't give an answer, I'm sorry.
But you have a lot of very, very good... The book has a lot of wisdoms, and each of them start with a quote that is near and dear to you. There was one around common sense, which is the most, you called it the intellectual asset that we have. What's happening to common sense? That's really important.
What's happening to common sense? Well, common sense is everywhere if you look for it, really. It depends what the people, really, what they want to do. I mean, everybody in this room here has at one time or most of his life common sense, what he's doing and what he wants to do. You know, I mean, it's hard to define common sense because each individual has a different opinion what's common sense. Common sense depends on the question, on the answers, on the environment, on the public. I mean, you know, it's one of those $64,000 questions.
But I love the fact that it was described as an intellectual asset, common sense. I will keep this as a reminder. Korab, what's your main takeaway from Peter's lecture?
Quite a few things, I would say, but I'm going to try to summarize them. So it was an excellent lecture, so well done. I love how do you take, at times when we talk about climate change, it can feel so overwhelming because it's everything. And it was really great to see how he was able to break it down into what is practical and how do the systems then connect to actually solve the biggest problem that we have of the few generations to come. I think the other piece was just on kind of the emotions I, for a minute, had to check in on where I felt. And at times it changes, maybe multiple times in the day, depending on what news I'm consuming. But I, at the same time, try to stay hopeful when it comes to the work that we're doing. I love the examples because a lot of the times the work in climate has always been, you know, positioned as it's against economy. And I think you just showed two brilliant examples on how it actually all connects. So overall, I thought it was really amazing. What did you think?
No, that's a perfect segue to the next question.
Let me give you a definition of common sense. So there is a road, and the road is terribly busy, okay? And there's a light for pedestrians to cross the road, right? If that light is red, it's common sense to not cross the road, okay? And if it's no common sense, you cross the road and you get hit.
Love this example. My takeaway is maybe a bit banal, but I want to spend more time in nature. And I really, that's why I said thank you for the journey, because for me it was a journey. And we spoke a little bit over lunch about the dichotomy of nature versus people, which it isn't at all. So I want to channel being more in nature. But the segue I wanted to tap into is the realization that we sit on one of those levers, right? So you and I, we both work for Novartis, and thank God, obviously, we have to lean in as companies. There is no question whether or not. But my question to you, Korab, is what do we do beyond? Like, let's not talk about the things that we know and we have to tick the boxes. What is Novartis doing that goes beyond of what we have to do?
Yeah, so I think I would say just on climate overall, we view that as a table stake. You have to do your part. both on resilience, but also mitigation, and that's something that we're really proud of the work that we do. I wanted to just recall actually a recent example. I was just in Ghana when we launched Court and Baby. And just 2 days ago, our CEO hosted a town hall here where he talked about malaria and the work that we do in malaria, which has been going on really for the last 80 years or so. And that work is really incredible because the treatments that we have are absolutely life-changing for patients. So with Court and Baby, and why that was such an incredible moment for us, because we developed actually a medicine that you can give it to babies. Because usually babies are not, exactly into swallowing a huge pill. So parents would frequently have to break them into, different parts. And because Coartem, which is the anti-malaria pill, is made by 2 different compounds, one is 20 milligram, one is 120. When you break it, you can actually overdose the baby. So Novartis invested quite a bit in science and really being able to kind of use the expertise that we have in-house to be able to develop that medicine. And just being during the launch event in Ghana, understanding their local context, understanding, kind of hearing from patient advocates, the mothers, the physicians, and it was such a moving experience in terms of something that is not necessarily an issue for us here in this beautiful country. The context is very different in a place like Ghana. So to be able to continue that focus on innovation is really where I view that, where you talked about how do we go beyond just the breakthroughs.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And it's a great example because it's a commitment over decades. It's not something that we just onboard.
Many decades.
Should we ask the audience if they have questions?
I think so.
Tough questions. We want tough questions, right?
No?
So we have anyone.
I'm enjoying being on the panel here. I'll repeat what he said.
Anyone with a question to either of the gentlemen up here on stage?
Hello, good evening. I'm Isabelle Kumli. I have the chance to be an engineer in agronomy from Polytechnicum of Zurich, and I'm very proud of having this education 25 years ago. Thank you so much for welcoming us here in this amazing audience. A question that follows us as agronomists since a long time, but is getting more alarmist, is I'm wondering between the natural disaster, between big landlords with different aims of sometimes tough conservation, sometimes different aims of monocultural agriculture, of industrial agriculture. I wonder how much land is left for this agroecological development, and if it's still enough continuity on the pattern of the land to have a real impact, or it's just nice to hear.
I mean,
Well, thanks for an excellent question. And of course, we can discuss a lot, and there are a lot of land system scientists here in the room to work together. But just from my side, 2 things I would like to perhaps say. If we look at the land which is currently being used also as agricultural land, we're currently using 3/4 of the land related to livestock, to meat or dairy products. And we're creating only 17% of the calories. And the whole rest, the 23% of the remaining land, are actually used for vegetables and stuff, and they are creating almost the rest, the 70% of calories. So there's a total mismatch. So if you would only tweak the food preferences a little bit, you would liberate enormous stretches of land for different types of production. And the second thing is, we also know that 1/3 of the land is only used to produce food waste, or food that will be wasted later on. So another small lever or a small cogwheel of change. So if we can work on these things, I think, yes, land is under pressure, land is being squeezed from many different claims, but there is a huge potential also to liberate land and work there in a different way. But I'm sure colleagues will have additional ideas on that.
Yes, my name is Manuel Medina. I work here at Novartis, and my question is for Professor Messerli and for Mr. Wyss as well. We are right now in a moment where our minds are squeezed for attention, and distractions are everywhere, and crises are everywhere. How do you inspire action? One element that you mentioned in your talk, Professor, was getting people out of that depression and into a more positive state. I would like to ask both of you, what's the single strongest element that you found to get people out of it and into action? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Well, you know, I will also admit that I might be frustrated and sometimes down in this valley bottom where I don't see the change happening. But there are many ways, at least from my talk, as you can see, where I really get motivated is when I see those local communities taking the change into their own hand. That is making me confident that there are people who can move up on the other side. Perhaps two more things I would like to say. I think we also have to discuss about values. I think if we discuss about values, we can agree again what we want to achieve. We're not so different. We're not so polarized. And I think that gives us the orientation, the purpose, what we should do. And then also, I'm a scientist. And as a scientist, I think we need to use the evidence. There is so much evidence. There is so much opportunities. I try to explain. In all these levers, we see many interesting things. But most importantly, out of all of that, I think we have to think systemically again. We're surrounded by exponential curves of change happening. And the key will be, how can we accelerate with our action also the change we induce? And perhaps the secret weapon is also feedback loops. I know you are much more literate about money and interest rates, but if I do 20 steps across the room, you know, I come to the other side. If I double every step, after 13 steps, I would reach New York, and after 19 steps, I would reach the moon. So how can we close with systems thinking and evidence those feedback loops? Because this is the key to accelerated change. That's what we need. Incremental change will not be enough. We have to accelerate. So a few reactions, but not a comprehensive answer.
Do you also want to react on the question?
You mean that question here? Can you just rephrase the question, please?
What's the secret to actually get into action mode, to be active and not depressed with everything around us?
Just what I do at 90 years old. Just keep doing things. That's all I can tell you.
What's
You know, don't give up. If you work on a project and it's almost failing, find a way to finish it. You know, I mean, it's impossible to give a recipe for everybody in this room. Yeah. But most people in this room I know are in their own way very successful. You know, you're in good schools, you are in universities, you keep doing things. Just keep doing what you've been doing.
When I think about impact in my personal little world, it's also often deciding what not to do. How do you decide where to put your energy and funds, which projects to support?
Well, I don't really know, but when I get excited about a project, I get involved. When I think the project has no value, I go and drink.
Surround yourselves with projects that are exciting enough to keep actually wanting to cross the finish line.
That's inspiring.
That is inspiring. Do we have more questions in the audience? Yes, over there.
Test. Whoa. Hi, I'm addressing Korab, and I wanted to ask you. I'm very untalented in understanding abstract formulations and systems and theories. So what is your part in your daily life? For me, as a pragmatic, result-driven person, 3 to 4 to 5 examples of your daily work in Novartis, what you deliver to this planet and to sustainability.
Now it's getting tough.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll break it into 2 parts. Of course, individually, there are actions that and decisions that I make every day that influence in what is the impact that I'm having. And it's really from the minute you wake up. If you're just more thoughtful about the decisions you're making, you will very quickly identify how many times you are at a crossroad where you're having to make that decision. On the work front, when it comes to environmental sustainability, one of the things that we did as a company, which I think it's really important, is that we set the North Star of wanting to be net zero by 2040. We're one of the 3 pharma companies that has actually set that target. For us, it was really important for people who are in my role to guide the organization through that decision-making process, because you're looking to essentially project into all of the actions that we will be taking, from your manufacturing sites to the portfolio of your medicines to everything else, and then how do you actually get to net zero? So part of the role that we do, we drive both the education within the organization, but then we also drive the strategy, so all of the conversations that have to happen with operations and everywhere else where environment touches, so that we're able to create a unified roadmap on what are the actions that we need to take to be able to actually deliver on the commitment that we made. So it's not necessarily one big thing a day, it is more really the ability for us to activate the organization, set the North Star, make sure that we have clear plans on what the organization needs to do, because it's the collective effort of Novartis versus my individual effort itself. I don't know if that was still too abstract from your perspective. But some of this, it does require, because we are an organization of 74, 5, 6, 7,000 people or so. So depending on the day, so that's just something that, you do have to think about how do you activate the entire organization toward a common cause. And the role that I have, it is around that activation and making sure that everyone gets together and starts to deliver against that vision.
I would like to bring another aspect to the discussion, and the thing that slowly rolls me into the depressive state is the crisis of international law. I think you've worked for the UN. The UN body is sort of in a difficult position due to several things, but there's an actual real crisis of international law, and we would need international law to establish rules globally. I think that would be so helpful, because every solution you propose, every CO2 tax, etc., always has a problem, because everybody says, well, if the others don't do it, we do it, we have a problem. So my questions to you, Mr. Messerli, in this system, how do we re-establish the rule of law in international dimensions?
Well, I probably cannot answer your question because it is a huge question and there are probably experts who are better suited to respond to that. I personally believe that the UN is not doomed. I think the UN will stay and it will continue to play a role. It is challenged by many things, and if I look back at 2015, that was perhaps an exceptional year where countries agreed on the Paris Agreement, they agreed on the 2030 agenda, and perhaps this is a unique moment and we're going through troubled waters, but I think just by pure necessity, it will come back that we need to talk to each other in many ways. So I don't have this answer of how to reinforce it. It will probably depend also on the leaders and the people who are behind those leaders, electing them and voting for them. But perhaps another part from the side of the answer is, at least for us at the Wyss Academy, it's not only the UN level, we also work in very fragile rule of law environments, be it in Southeast Asia, in Laos, or in Madagascar. We just had a coup d'etat, and in Kenya there is fuss. In Peru they just let the president go. So when we talk to our partners, they say, for us this is normal. The instability, that's not new. That's the normal. And I think in this context is what I try to say about what we call those coalitions for change. So not just rely on the law that it will work and will be applied, but explicitly make a network of powerful actors from business, from the government, from civil society, and try to bring them into the favor of the changes that we want to see in a flexible way, and managing those networks and knowing who plays what role. I think that's perhaps also a way forward of trying to influence power through networks and not just rely on laws, etc. So these coalitions of change, where we have the actors of different level agreeing that they want to see a certain change, is at least how we conceive of in the Wyss Academy and how we operate also on the ground. Perhaps a model that we have to think about also at higher levels, perhaps here in Switzerland. What's the alliance of people who are still standing up for change, and try to connect them?
Looking at the time, I unfortunately slowly have to close us off, but just for this second part, as announced, there will be a third part, which is all of us in an informal setting over an apéro. So we will continue the conversations. But to close this panel, I have one question to all three of you, the same question. You had a magic wand.
What? Here, I can't hear very well.
You have a magic wand. One wish. You wake up tomorrow morning, one thing is changed. What is it?
I mean, I can use the magic wand tomorrow morning?
No, you can use it now, but when you wake up tomorrow morning, one thing is changed overnight.
No wars.
No wars. Not an easy one to follow. Over to you, Korab.
World peace.
Doesn't count.
What did you say?
World peace. That doesn't count. That was nicking from you.
Well, he added to my answer.
True. Okay.
Perfect,
if we want to see
you.
it for a build, okay,
Thank
okay,
you.
it counts. World peace.
He said it counts.
It counts. He said it counts. Pete.
Well, perhaps this is very nice, but I'll be just pragmatic. Something which science has been calling for, and the evidence is there for 30 years, and there has never been any political will to implement. It's a global carbon tax.
Very practical.
What did Pete say? I couldn't hear. Pete, I couldn't hear what
Carbon
you
I
tax.
said a global tax on carbon.
Oh,
That would change a lot of things.
I might not catch you later. Would you do me the honors and give me an autograph?
of course.
Thank you kindly.
What am I signing? Oh.
Thank you for being a brilliant audience. We'll see you over there.